Welcome to The Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. David Weill, a transplant surgeon and former director of the Center for Advanced Lung Diseases and the Lung and Heart-Lung Transplant Program at Stanford University Medical Center. Dr. Weill is also the author of the new novel, All That Really Matters, and a previous book, a memoir called Exhale. And he just told me that he's working on a third. So I'm very excited to talk to him about his writing. I'm almost finished reading his novel, and I can't wait to ask him questions about it. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. And now to my guest, welcome, Dr. David Weill.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Weill, I am thrilled that you're here. You know, I'm a writer myself. I have 4 books, but I do have an unpublished novel. But what I'd really like to have is a published one. And you've done that. So I'm really excited to ask you some kind of technical writing questions. And, it takes a lot of time to put this together and some thought and maybe some self-reveal that, you may have had second thoughts about. I'm not sure. So, but before we get into that, I just want, not everybody knows how you get to be a transplant surgeon. And then it's my understanding that, are you operating today? Are you still an active transplant surgeon in the OR, or is that kind of behind you and you've moved on?
Yeah, let me clear up a common misperception. My patients actually had it too. I am not the surgeon. I am a transplant pulmonologist. I ran the program. Surgeons are certainly part of a team, but there were 60 people on the team. So I myself am not a surgeon. I'm a transplant pulmonologist. I can't tell you how many of my patients assumed I was the surgeon because they didn't see much of the surgeon. While they had a very important role, they were 6 hours doing the operation and then turn them back over to our team, and that was it. So they identified us as surgeons. So don't feel bad about thinking that I'm a surgeon. A lot of people
Well, and
do.
of course, the main character in the novel is a transplant surgeon. So
That's right.
I want to, let's just jump right into that for a second. How much of that novel is autobiographical? Is it like
Well,
5% or 50% or 95%?
certainly less than half. There's certainly some overlaps and parallels with my career, but the character Joe Bosco is mostly based on combinations of people I worked with. I worked with a lot of surgeons. They were part of our transplant team, obviously. And these are interesting characters to say the least. And I think Joe Bosco was more some of the folks that I worked with than me, although yeah, he spent some time in New Orleans. I spent some time in New Orleans. He had a German father. I had a German father. But I think the character was mainly based on people that I worked with.
Okay, well that's very, very helpful. What about his issues? I mean, he had some issues, right? And they seem
Yeah.
very personal. They seem very, very personal. At least, and by that I mean you did a great job in writing this story. I mean, as a writer, I was like, boy, I hope I can do that when I write a story and make it so convincing and natural.
Yeah, this is the world I lived in. So, I didn't have trouble imagining it. I didn't have to imagine it. It's the world I was in. And so hopefully I was able to paint it in a way that folks felt like they were in that world too. But I think that the real life nature of it's fiction, of course, but you know what they say about fiction, it's a pack of lies that tells the truth. And I think that there's a lot of truth in this novel, but it's fictionalized. When I wrote my memoir and published 2021 called Exhale, obviously it was nonfiction. I was the main character and I had to stick to the facts. the writing of the novel allowed me to explore this world and some of the issues that are in this world, ethical and moral, but it allowed me to wander into places I really couldn't in the memoir.
Oh, okay, that's very helpful. Now, another question, and one that I've been wrestling with personally, if I were to write a novel, or I think I'm old enough now I can write a memoir too, is it's David Weill, and it doesn't say MD.
Yeah.
How did you make that decision?
That was very intentional. And believe it or not, the publisher and I talked about that for about an hour. My memoir obviously is David Weill, MD, because it's my life as a doctor. I think the novel, though, I wanted to separate myself as
Hmm.
a doctor, as a character in this novel. And, admittedly difficult to do so because of the overlaps between myself and the main character. But we decided to leave MD off of it because we didn't want it to be a doctor writing a novel. We wanted it to be an author writing a book. And I think even though it's a subtle step in that direction, I think it was one we wanted to take.
Oh, I think it's very declarative one way or the other. Michael Crichton famously never used MD, right?
Right,
On his, and I think Robin Cook didn't either. I think
right.
they saw themselves, Michael Crichton certainly saw himself more as a writer than as a doctor. He never even did a residency, even though he graduated Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Robin Cook practiced medicine, but I'm not sure. I don't think he put MD on his novels.
Yeah, I
Um,
can't remember. There's also a physician writer who never practiced medicine named Walker Percy, who's
yes.
from Louisiana, as am I, and so I grew up reading his works, and he didn't put MD behind it either. So, and he didn't write really much about medicine at all.
Okay. So why write this book at all?
After I wrote the memoir, I felt like I had gotten about 75% of the world illustrated, the world that I lived in, behind the scenes look at, high stakes medicine, which transplant certainly is. But I didn't feel like I got into all of it. And I couldn't really get into all of it because of the sensitivity of the issues, patient confidentiality, the institutions that I worked with probably wouldn't be thrilled with some of the things that I might say. And I think that what I wanted to do with the novel is just say, look, I'm getting into all of it about transplant, the good, the bad, the ugly. And my main character loved transplant, as I do. I love it. But there are some issues that I think are worth exploring that we could do better. And I wanted to get into that in the novel.
Yeah, sometimes pointing out those issues doesn't make you that popular,
Right.
and that was certainly
So,
what
so I've
happened
heard.
to the main character, right?
Right.
It's like not really, people. It it doesn't serve the interests of the institution when you point out the flaws in the
Right.
short term. In the long run, yes, right. The
Yeah.
vision is to make everything better, but in the short term, you're rocking the boat, and those people are not always appreciated. Okay, so it was really you wanted to use your personal experience to uh as kind of a soapbox, right? To
Yeah, in many
draw
ways it was.
attention.
It was also an interesting way to explore, and this is what I love about fiction. You imagine a character, and all you do all day long while you're writing it is say, what if he went right instead of left? Or what if he chose door number one instead of door number two? And I did this all day long with this character. He had a very steep rise in his career and then got himself into some trouble. And he had a lot of choices, a lot of decisions to make. And as an author, we're also making decisions for the character and trying to imagine what would happen if he pick door number one instead of door number two.
I was really. Is it okay if we talk about a few little parts of it?
Of
Because
course.
I'm not gonna give away the ending actually because I don't know it because I've
Okay.
still got about another 30, 40 pages to go. But it seems to be going in a pleasant direction anyway. In the middle, I was a bit concerned, but there's a few bit characters that are very, very interesting. Um, the main character has no love for hospital administrators, which uh, is not a surprise. But then when he is in rehab, he meets this Allie.
Mm.
I thought that was very, very interesting to me because why was that character there? and also it gave some depth, I think, to the main character, who up until then is pretty self-serving, and he really begins to be, well, I think he's naturally compassionate, but it's really been buried under his ambition, is the way I would put it. And his compassion is kind of rising to the surface once he kind of gets out of the maelstrom of the 25-hour day that he typically works. So how did Allie get involved?
Allie had a lot of different purposes, I think, in this story. One, I think that she reminded Joe, and she reminded me also, of a lot of young women that I treated with chronic diseases. She had a chronic disease as well, but it was a mental health disease. And I think I wanted to teach Joe with that character, teach him what really matters, to use that phrase, but also to educate him about what could happen, what was possible if he made the wrong turn. And I think that she grounded him in a way in the rehab experience, because his character was somebody that might think that rehab's ridiculous or blow it off or go through the motions and not really take it seriously. I think she helped him understand that he was in the right place at the right time.
Because I found her character very, very interesting. Um, Also, the whole hospital, I'm still active in practice. I'm an associate professor at University of Tennessee here in Memphis, and I deal with residents and hospital administrators. And we did have actually and we do have a transplant program at a neighboring hospital that has also had its share of news stories. Although I'm
Yeah.
not personally involved with that. That's the other, that's across the street. It might as well be 100 miles away.
Right.
I'm in a different circle, but certainly it all comes across as very there's there's a verisimilitude, right? That's the fancy
Yeah.
writer's word. It seems
Yeah.
very, very true to life. What about the tree? I couldn't figure out what the tree is doing on the cover. There's this big tree. Do you have a copy of the book
Yeah.
in arm's length there? I
No,
mean,
I don't,
there's this
unfortunately.
beautiful
Yeah.
tree. It's like,
Yeah.
what's with the tree?
I know it's an interesting question, and again, I find all of this publishing stuff fascinating, because picking the cover for a nonfiction book versus a fiction one's very different. Anybody that sees my memoir will understand that cover immediately. Apparently, in fiction, it doesn't necessarily, the cover, have to relate to the story so much as it does have to catch somebody's eye and be beautiful. I think the cover
Ah.
is beautiful, and I do think it catches somebody's eye because of the red kind of tree, but it doesn't necessarily relate to any themes in the story. And I asked my publisher about that quite a bit, and the folks there kept on saying doesn't have to in fiction. So
Well, that's fascinating because I was like, well, I haven't hit the ending yet, so maybe there's going to be some symbolism that pops out. But
yeah,
it's kind of a relief for me because well, there's the tree of life, I guess, is sort of a universal thing, and that seemed to fit in. But beyond that, all right, so that helps. Um, so transplant and is one of those things that I'm not sure everyone realized, but a lot of medicine is, you have clinic all day, and I see patients at the hospital. Of course, we cover at night. But in transplant, you really have a 24-hour day because when those organs are available, it doesn't matter if it's 8 a.m. or 2 a.m., it's time to go. And everybody's got to show up and be at their best and do it. And if you're a human being, that's very demanding, right? If you really, it's very hard to have another life. And of course, your main character is thoracic surgeon. They're famous for that. When I did my sub internship in surgery in medical school, the our guy was this Dr. McEnany, and Dr. McEnany was twice divorced, thoracic surgeon, real no nonsense character. And you would call him from the emergency room and say, Dr. McEnany, I think I got this guy here. I think he's got a surgical, abdomen. It might be his aorta. And like 15 minutes later, it didn't matter what time of night it was, 2 a.m., Dr. McEnany would show up with a tie and a sport coat, and he'd be in the emergency room like this was the best possible thing that could ever happen, would be, a potential surgical case. That's kind of what he lived for. And, but, it makes family life kind of challenging. So did you have that? was that part of your life, that family life was difficult because of you weren't the surgeon, but you're part of the team. I'm sure the team has to show up and make
Yep.
sure everything works. And
Yeah, I very much led a cardiothoracic surgical life without being a surgeon. They were my partners, and I was head of the program, and I had to work like they did for a lot of reasons. Number one, there was a lot of work to do, but number two, the commitment they were making had to be the same commitment that I was making, and that was important to me. And to your point, though, the reason I stepped away after 20 years of doing this kind of work was not only the physical toll, but the emotional toll as well. And so my family and I made a decision as my daughters were growing up that I was going to step away and start my second chapter.
can I ask, how old were your children at that time?
Yeah, one was going into middle school, so sixth grade, and one was going into high school. I have two daughters, and I missed a lot of soccer games when they were very young, and I thought that this was an inflection point as they were really noticing my absence. As they got
Right,
older.
starting to have lives of their own.
Yes, very much so. And the burden fell on my wife a lot during that period. I was in the hospital. And I, even when I started doing this kind of work, I thought it had a shelf life to it. I didn't think I would do it till, age 65 and you get a gold watch and a going away party. I just didn't see that for me. I thought I was going to do it for a period of time and then stop.
Hmm.
And that's how I worked it out. And fortunately, I've been able to develop a second professional life, which I very much enjoy.
Right. So that was my next question. So, you're working 25 hours a day, right? It's a full day and you're missing a lot of stuff. Um, Hard to have high quality family time. I'm sure when you're home, you're not always at your best. That's the other thing people don't realize. You're putting your best foot forward at work and you get tired. And your only
You got
time to
it.
sort of recharge is when you're home. But
Yep.
that's when everybody at home wants you to be at your best, and maybe you're not. Does that
You
sound right?
got it. I mean, I would come home and I'd be thinking about the hospital, or there would be an organ donor available an hour after I got home. And I was tending toward reading a book and kind of blocking out the rest of the world or watching a game on TV. And I was definitely not at my best at home. I gave a lot of my, emotional bandwidth to the hospital.
And as I don't know if you've heard this saying, but the hospital does not love you back.
That's for sure. I found that out, I think a lot of us, especially when we're younger, we think we're indispensable. We think that if we do a great job, that everybody will love you and so forth. And that was true to a certain extent. But then I realized, especially after I left Stanford, that the program went on without me, and somebody else stepped up, and it was almost like a relay race where I just passed the baton to somebody else.
Yeah, it is a little disheartening, I think, when you put your heart and soul into something and you think you're important, but you're just sort of a ledger item,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a friend,
director of pulmonary,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, a close friend of mine said it the best about, especially about transplant programs, but I think it could apply to anything. He said there's certain defined civilizations that you go through with these programs, and you just, after I left, they created a new civilization. Many of the nurses left, some of
Hmm.
the surgeons actually left, and they created a kind of a new civilization. They have and that's the way it is. But you're right. I mean, you look at yourself as, wow, they can't do this without me, but they certainly can and do.
Yes, I wonder about that at least once a week. Now, I was thrilled that there was a neurologist in your novel. He had just a bit part, but we don't. I'm a neurologist, of course, and we don't get that much play.
Right.
So I think that was obviously quite intentional that you took that this problem that your main character had was, if not universal, was a lot more common than people think.
Yeah.
Burnout, right?
Yep. Yeah,
And
definitely. I think,
and
and burnout seems to me, I don't know how you feel about it, as just a, very generic catch-all phrase. It's like saying you have a car, but it doesn't tell you what kind and what year and all that. I think burnout, is interesting because it comes in so many different forms. It's almost just disillusionment, you know. And the hospital ecosystem is so tough that it's almost untenable for a lot of people to continue practicing medicine. I get a lot of emails and messages and from all kind of people that have read my books that have said, how do you do it? Can I get out? And I don't love to hear that because we need great people in medicine, but I do think something's going on out there.
Yes, well, in fact, I'll just seg a little bit. The sponsor for our program is Locum Tenens, and I've done
Mm.
Locum Tenens for many, many years. I wrote a book about it, and I have very mixed feelings about it because it's a wonderful way for physicians to sort of step back and control their schedules and still be physicians without taking a non-clinical job like, looking at insurance claims and deciding
Right.
if these are appropriate or not, or, stepping outside into other non-clinical areas. And I think it's a wonderful option for that. So physicians don't have to give up the clinical world and can kind of, do it on their own pace. On the other hand, why is it growing? Why are things so bad that locum tenens is becoming so popular and non-clinical careers are becoming so attractive? One of my professional colleagues, a guy named John Jerica, and he has a whole podcast. He's up to episode 300 and something about non-clinical careers, which
Mm.
is physicians who really want to get out, that they are burned out, they don't see a future in what they're doing, and they want to get out. And I think that's a national tragedy. And there's a lot of a lot of training when to get to where you are. And of course, physicians are still quite necessary. We do have AI, but they don't fill that is not going to fill the gap for a long, long time. We still need human physicians to take care of people. Okay, so that was my little spiel. Now, along those lines, how did you get out? Where did you go?
Well, I left California in 2016, and we had the whole map open to us at that point because I knew I was going to do non-clinical work at that point. We thought about staying in California, and then we had a family meeting about it, and we decided that we would actually move south for sure. And we looked at a few southern cities, and then we decided, look, I mean, what about my hometown, which is New Orleans? And everybody was very enthusiastic about it. My daughters wanted to go to high school there for a lot of different reasons that you might imagine. And my wife loves the city, and I think that it was coming home, but I had to, while we were moving location, physical location, I also had to move my brain, what I was going to do next, and I took a lot of time to think about that, and I literally got out a yellow pad and said, you know, stuff I like and I'm good at over here, stuff I am good at but don't like over here, and stuff I'm not good at and don't like, that's not going to happen. I'm going to stop doing anything like that. And I felt like the things that I am pretty good at is building transplant programs and fixing ones that aren't doing very well. And so I have a group of people now, and our job is to go in there and help programs that are underperforming, or a hospital wants to start a new program, and we go in there and help them out. And it's been very rewarding.
Good for you. That sounds innovative. And I like your categorization. I was just writing that down because I think the buzzword for me, anyway, of 2024 is intentionality.
Mhm.
That, I mean, we're all so busy doing stuff that gets thrown at us that sometimes you have to step back and say, well, what is it that I really want to be doing? And I want to be intentional about, whether it's
Right,
spending more time with your family or reading more journal articles or
right,
changing how your clinic runs, but kind of taking the baton there and saying, okay, I'm going to be in charge of this problem for a while and make some decisions. Um, I think intentionality helps in the burnout, which is sort of helplessness, is a big part of that. I think being burned out, it's like, well, nobody listens to me. So how often, after you stopped, I got my phone here in my hand. How long did it take before you stopped looking at your phone? You
a long
know,
time. I mean,
or those
I was
text messages in the middle of the night about organs?
yeah, I mean, that was 24/7, and I, was a control, I wouldn't say freak, but enthusiast. And I took all the donor call for the whole time I was at Stanford. And so that was every night the phone was going off. I still have it by my bedside because I've got, two kids out there that are now college age, and I've got, an elderly mother and so forth. So I still leave the phone on, but I know that the donor call's not coming, and I very rarely get woken up in the middle of the night anymore. So
which is not a problem, right? Not
no,
getting
it's not
it's
a
not a
problem.
problem.
It took about a year to straighten out my sleep, but it finally straightened out. So
There's a new book coming.
yeah,
Can you give us just a little
yeah.
capsule?
Sure. I mean, it leaves medicine in a certain way, but in a certain way it doesn't. The book is about identity and how we look at ourselves in the mirror, and it's especially about religious identity. It's
Hmm.
something I've struggled with quite a bit during my life, and it probably the whole topic probably informs me about why I became a transplant doctor to begin with. It all fits in, but the book is not going to be nearly as medicine intensive as my first two. It's going to be very much a search for belonging and how we, explain ourselves to ourselves. And I think that identity is such a big issue out there. And if you throw in religious ambiguity, it really is worth exploring. I've been intensely working on this book, but it doesn't feel like work at all. It's great fun. So I'm having a blast.
Can you give me an idea of your typical day? How much time do you spend earning a living
Yeah.
separate from writing your novels? Although there may be some overlap there.
Yeah, there's some. I kind of split the day in half. I'm a morning writer. I don't write well in the afternoon. It takes uber focus, as you know, because you're a writer. And so I write in the morning until about noon, and then I have something to eat and start my consulting work in the afternoon and try to put all my phone calls, all the Zoom stuff, all the consulting issues. And I work with companies as well that are in the transplant space, but I schedule all of those in the afternoon. I really try to save save the morning for writing.
Oh, I love to hear that. I love to hear that because I think non-writers don't realize that it's not like you can write a half hour and then make a call and there's a whole mindset that you kind of have to get, it's like getting dressed to go jogging. You can't just say, "Hey, I'm going to go jogging." You got to put your sneakers on, there's stuff you
Yeah,
got to do to kind of before you got to stretch, and then you run. Well, writing, you got to, get your desk sorted out and
right.
thinking sorted out. There's a lot there. So that sounds like a pretty. So writing is about half time for you now.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes in the afternoons, I'll go back and look at what I wrote in the morning and fiddle with it a little bit. And then I'll also sketch out other writing projects. I write pieces, opinion pieces for various publications. They're all on my website to the extent folks want to look at those. And I think that that kind of writing is helpful. It's 1,000 words. I have to make my point quickly and get out. I think it's good exercise for me. And sometimes in the afternoons, I sketch out potential other book projects and try to think about what might be next, which is fun, I think.
For those who want to pursue this a little more, remind me of your website.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's davidweil.com, two L's at the end of Weil, which is a common mistake, but it's davidweil.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. David Weill, this has been a great conversation. Anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you for doing this. I hope the listeners out there get something out of hearing, probably a non-traditional path that I've taken in medicine, but I think it's one worth exploring. There's a lot to what we can do, and I think a lot of times we get put into a little box, but there's a lot that we can do.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. Dr. David Weill, thanks for joining me on The Art of Medicine.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time. This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com